Kashagan's lesson: megaprojects in a shrinking bowl. Kashagan was supposed to be untouchable, too big to fail, too expensive to question. A carbonate giant stitched under the North Caspian skin, holding billions of barrels at pressures that make engineers speak softly. Then the water fell, and the project learned its bowl had a hole. Start with where it sits: 3 to 4 meters of water on a good day, ice 4 to 5 months, a year, riverborne silt drifting like a slow fog, and more than $50 billion already sunk into making it work. The field's solution was steel and distance. Build artificial islands out on the flat, raise living quarters and manifolds above storm chop, and run sour fluids through metallurgy that doesn't forgive mistakes. More than $50 billion went into that bet. The first leaks years ago taught everyone what hydrogen sulfide does to pipe. Replacements came, production returned, but shallow never stopped being shallow. Winter wrote the calendar. Ice returns early, splintering into flows that twist around pilings. Summer rewrote the margins, hotter, dustier, shallower. Barges don't just slow, they stop, trapped in pressure ridges strong enough to shove an anchor sideways. Crews learned to read ice like a second language. Freeze up meant stockpiles had to be perfect. Miss a filter order in October, and you ran out in January with a storm pinning helicopters on deck. Spring used to be the relief, thick ice thinning to a chocolate slush that barges could nose through. Lately, spring arrives earlier but weaker, with draft so thin that a misjudged wake plows silt. The decline runs near 7 centimeters a year. Every centimeter steals a day somewhere. The window shrank from both ends. Hovercraft became the patch. They skate over mud and ice and water alike, hauling crews to islands when hulls can't. They're loud, they're temperamental, and they don't carry compressors. For heavy lifts, modularization took over. Break everything into pieces a shallow draft barge or a winter conv can handle, then reassemble at sea on a platform that wants a still day you rarely get anymore. Every puzzle solved by modules adds joints, gaskets, and failure points that need maintenance you must schedule around whether you don't control. Hydrogen sulfide set the rules inside the pipe. Everything from weld rod to elastomer's bode to sour service. Oxygen became both lifeline and constraint. Confined space entries on islands came with gas monitors that chirped like anxious birds. Maintenance schedules had to match water windows, those short runs of calm that let a crew transfer safely. Falling levels made those windows shorter and more precious. Navigation drafts tightened. A barge stuffed to plan sat an inch too deep and kissed bottom in a channel that had been dredged last month. The skipper lightened down, waited for wind set to lift the basin a hand's width, and a 10-hour job became a 30-hour dance. A winter micro-story stuck with people. A convoy of 2 barges with spools, a tug with a patient captain, and a forecast that promised a narrow lane. By dusk, ice stacked like broken plates, and the lead barge froze in a new ridge. A second tug freed it at dawn, but the spools missed their maintenance slot. The contractor stayed on hire. The island crew pulled a workaround from a laminated binder, demurred a non-critical loop, and carried the risk to the next window. That's how costs crawl, not in headlines, but in nights like that. Meanwhile, the lake's retreat crept into everything. Soundings around artificial islands showed the seabed dropping relative to the decks, not because the platforms moved, but because water left and sediments shifted. The gap between designed sea state and lived sea state widened. Workboats earned ice-class retrofits to shove through shoulder seasons that used to be kinder. Survey cats with twin hulls took over patrols where deep V hulls once sufficed, skipping over chop that stacked too short and too mean. Even the air changed. Dust blew off new flats in heat waves, coating intakes and gumming filters meant for salt, not silt. Per barrel costs moved in quiet increments. More dredging for approach channels, more towage on standby for the what-if that happens twice a month, more pilotage hours as ports demanded escorts in water they no longer trusted. A compressor brought in for a planned outage waited on a crane barge that waited on a tug that waited on a wind that didn't behave. The outage stretched, gas re-injection lagged, and reservoir management nudged a notch from optimal to acceptable. Multiply that by quarters, and national budgets felt the weight. In a place where oil taxes pay for roads and salaries, a 10-day slip isn't a line item. It's a rumor in a ministry and a call to the operator. Kazakhstan's answer was predictable: more steel. Extend jetties, drop new piles, widen channels, buy amphibious kit, add redundancy. The project's answer was similar: thicker wraps on sour lines, more LDAR crews to hunt fugitive methane when logistics stress made maintenance ugly, electrify where possible to cut flaring that satellites can see. The math still argued for staying. The reservoir is real. The sunk capex is massive. The alternative is watching a decade of engineering strand on a mudflat. But under the confidence sat a new humility. Kashagan was built on the assumption that the bowl would wobble, not tip. Now draft lines on pilothouse windows feel like cliff edges. A young planner walks a whiteboard, ringing the days each month when weather, water, permits, and people align. There are fewer rings than last year. She adjusts crew shifts, swaps in a hovercraft for a crew boat, and slides a safety talk an hour earlier to beat a forecast squall. It looks like logistics. It feels like triage. When the sea retreats, companies add steel, states add leverage. The field keeps pumping, the bowl keeps shrinking, and every barrel carries a little more cost, a little more risk, and a quiet admission: the water was always part of the infrastructure. Now that it's leaving, Kashagan has to rebuild the lake as much as the field. Route wars: who controls the Caspian flow? Follow the barrel and you'll find the map arguing with itself. Kazakhstan's crude leaves fields that sit on a shrinking bowl and has to pick a door. West, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium line runs to Novorossiysk on the Black Sea, a Soviet-era corridor modernized into the main artery. South and west, a lattice of rail and sea moves oil to Baku, then on to Georgia's ports and the Mediterranean through the Baku to Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. Each path carries politics like static. CPC is the workhorse. It lifts more than two-thirds of Kazakhstan's exports and runs through Russia. On a calm month, its invisible control rooms, pump stations, a marine terminal that swallows tankers and spits them out full. On a bad week, whether scrubs loadings or a maintenance window shaves capacity. Since sanctions tighten around Russia, every hiccup carries headlines and risk premia. Insurers rewrite clauses. Shippers file for waivers that take longer to land. A dent at a Black Sea berth becomes a policy call in a boardroom far from the Caspian. The alternative looks seductive on paper: move volumes to Baku across the inland sea, then feed BTC to Turkey's coast. It dodges Russian jurisdiction and rides infrastructure built for that very purpose. In practice, the Caspian sets the pace. Ferries that carry rail wagons and RORO decks that swallow trucks became the weak link even before levels fell. Now shallow approaches in Akto and Kurik force light loads and missed windows. Tug skippers time departures to winds set, not schedules. A perfect chain, and there's no such thing anymore, still loses hours at each link. Here's a micro story from a dispatcher's desk in Atirau. She's juggling 3 modes for one cargo: rail to Kurik, ferry to Alat, and a pipeline slot into BTC. A late dredge cut leaves the ferry half-loaded to clear the bar. The ship misses its Alat window by 6 hours. The BTC slot doesn't wait. She calls a trader, reroutes part of the parcel to Batumi by rail with a discount that hurts, and pushes the rest into storage. The refinery in Ceyhan keeps its run, but pays a premium for flexibility. The delay becomes a spread on a screen. Routes south tempt with swaps. Iran's Necker terminal can take oil north, feed it into Iran's system, and deliver equivalent crude to the Gulf. It's elegant because molecules don't have to pass the bottleneck you're staring at, but swaps wear sanctions like a collar. Quiet waivers exist, they're not durable. A minister who signs one today might retract it next quarter when a headline flares somewhere else. Traders plan with one hand while keeping the other in their pocket. Astrakhan is the inland pinch no one markets. The Volga Delta once felt generous: multiple passes, broad channels. Low water turns those braids into a maze of shallow cuts. Draft drops and barge tows that used to glide now crawl or wait for a wind that lifts a decimeter. Russia controls those gauges. Hydropower upstream sets release schedules that don't answer to a Kazakh loading plan. That's leverage without speeches. Capacity auctions expose that leverage in a polite format. Slots on ferries, windows at terminals, priority lines on single-track rail. They look like logistics, they behave like politics. A shipper with the right passport or portfolio sees friction vanish. Another sees no space until next week. Everyone pays in differentials. Caspian barrels trade under Brent not just for sulfur or API, but for doubt. Will it arrive when the refinery needs it? Then there's the shadow door. Older tankers with unclear ownership slip between busy inspectors. Smaller coastal craft carry parcels that don't show up on glossy route maps. Inland seas make AIS silence feel less like a stunt and more like an option. Authorities know. Sometimes they let it breathe because every quiet cargo relieves a louder bottleneck. Sometimes they pounce to make a point. Fines get paid. Patterns resume. Rail keeps the region honest when water wobbles. Kazakhstan pushes double tracking and longer passing loops east to west. Georgia and Azerbaijan tweak customs to shave hours. Even so, hills, tunnels, and bridges don't bend to ambition. A derailment in a gorge can stop a week's worth of containers. Storms on the Black Sea can block the last hop. Add the fall in Caspian levels, and ports must do two things at once. Dredge harder to keep ships moving and funnel more volume onto rails designed for fewer trains. Sanctions pressure doesn't turn off flows, it makes them inventive. Quiet waivers appear for third-party operators who can't be embarrassed. Labels change on bills of lading. Blends get adjusted. A refinery that swore off certain origins finds itself buying Mediterranean mix, with timing that matches an outage somewhere east. Everyone keeps a lawyer on speed dial. This was the moment everything changed for traders. Logistics became a trading strategy, not a cost center. Who controls the Caspian flow isn't just a flag or a pipe. It's a stack of permissions, pilots, pumps, and weather windows that prices every barrel twice, once for what it is, again for how it moves. And that stack is fragile on a good day. Climate volatility makes those good days rarer. Climate whiplash, evaporation, Volga, and the heat engine. To see why the water's leaving, you have to read the balance sheet. Inputs, rivers, rain, a little snow. Outputs, evaporation. The Caspian has no drain, only sky. 80% of what comes in rides the Volga. Lately, more leaves than arrives, and the line that matters is simple. The surface is dropping around 7 centimeters a year. Over 2 meters since the mid-200s. Not a bad decade, a new baseline. Up in the Volga basin, heat rewrites the calendar, and the Caspian pays the bill. Winters that used to bank snow now give rain that races off frozen ground. Spring pulses arrive earlier and thinner, missing the North shipping season by just enough to matter. Reservoirs from Rybinsk to Volgograd turn the river into a staircase of choices. Open gates to help navigation, and you shave kilowatts. Hold back for hydropower, and you starve the delta. Flood safety wins afternoons in June, but a shallow Astrakhan bar decides contracts in September. Managers call it multi-objective optimization. River towns call it low water. At Rybinsk, exposed shoals crack like old paint. At Nizhny Novgorod, ferry slips sit dry. Downstream, the delta braids that once spread wide have narrowed into guarded channels. A northerly blow can drop local levels 30 centimeters in hours, pushing salt tongues into places that used to taste fresh. Intakes cough. Villages drag pumps closer to what's left of the edge. Evaporation is the quiet thief. Longer ice-free seasons, warmer air, more water lost to sky. Warmer air holds more moisture. Longer ice-free seasons mean the lake can breathe water to the sky well into autumn. A still, warm October day that feels kind onshore acts like a vacuum over the surface, pulling centimeters you won't see until a captain reads the draft board and swears. The wind helps. Fetch across the open reaches stacks water south, then lets it slosh back north, a slow metronome that knocks port plans off beat. Here's where physics gets personal. In the north, depth is a rumor. Average water sits in the single digits of meters. Knock 7 centimeters a year off that, year after year, and you lose whole square kilometers to reeds and flats. Those new skins heat faster, throwing dust when drought rides the steppe. That dust lands on snow in the Volga headwaters, darkens it, and speeds the melt that already arrives too soon. A loop tightens. Storms don't fix it, they complicate it. Drought summers burn fields and shrink tributaries to threads. Then a blocked pattern breaks and dumps a month of rain in 3 days. Reservoirs lurch from caution to emergency discharge. The pulse roars past the people who needed a steady trickle in May and pours into the delta when yards are stacked with gear for a calm season that never arrives. The sea gets a spike, not a refill. By November, evaporation takes back the bonus with interest. The Volga is a man-made cascade now, and every choice upstream echoes in the Caspian's shallows. Hydropower plants chase evening peaks on the grid, meeting cities, air conditioners in July with water that downstream ports would rather keep for September draft. Navigation windows on the river grow fickle. Barges carry less. Tow speeds drop. The savings account at the end of the system. The sea sees only the leftovers. Meanwhile, the Kura and Ural bring their own thin gifts, stressed by irrigation upstream and hotter summers that sip more as water crosses floodplains. Precipitation over the Caspian itself helps, but not enough. A stray wet year teases a rebound that doesn't hold. The long trend runs down. Ports that counted on spring top-ups now count contingency days instead. A micro-story in a delta village makes the math human. A fisherman keeps a stick by his shed, notched with past springs. The 199s sit a hand higher. The 200s a finger. This year, the river never reached the notch that meant safe to set nets in Channel 2. He moved gear twice, watched salt creep up reeds that used to be fresh, and took a day job hauling gravel because the river that raised him keeps changing its mind. The lake's own heat engine plays a longer role. Bare water warms earlier. It breathes heat into the lower atmosphere, tugging wind and shaping local storms. Darker exposed flats feed convection, but there's less surface to trade with the sky each year, and what's left sits warmer. That means stronger late-season evaporation and sharper thermal contrasts that make wind set more violent. The system isn't just shrinking, it's getting twitchy. Upstream, reservoir operators face bad choices in good faith. Release more for ecology and navigation, and you sacrifice megawatt-hours. A grid now counts as clean. Hold for hydropower, and you turn the Caspian's north into a maintenance problem and a health story. Neither path fixes heat. Both borrow from someone else's column. This was the moment everything changed for planners. The Caspian stopped acting like a lake with a long memory and started behaving like a basin on fast forward. Declines near 7 centimeters a year don't read as headlines. They read as drafts, permits, and missed weeks. What leaves as vapor returns as storms in the wrong place at the wrong time. And every centimeter missing in spring costs a fortune by fall. Toxic flats, salinization, dust storms, and public health. When water leaves, the seabed doesn't. It waits. In the north, where depth used to measure in single meters, the retreat exposed a patchwork of clay, salt crusts, and sediments that remember every spill, every pipe, every runoff plume from a river mouth. Under a summer sun, those flats harden into plates. Under a dry wind, they lift. Aral Sea Syndrome is the shorthand the doctors use when they're being candid. It means salt dust storms that ride low and abrasive, carrying fine particles laced with whatever history saved, hydrocarbons from leaks, metals from old industry, nutrients that feed the wrong blooms in the wrong places. It means a clinic in Manchester where the intake spikes on days the wind turns east. Here's a morning there. A nurse unlocks at 7:45. By 8:20, kids with coughs crowd the chairs, eyes red, throats raw, asthma inhalers empty. Their parents talk in the hallway about yesterday's gusts, 2 dogs lost along the edge of new flats, and a field that used to be a shoreline. The doctor doesn't say dust. He says rest, fluids, refill, but he writes the date on a clipboard where he keeps a private tally next to a column labeled wind. Dust isn't the only insult. As the shoreline retreats, salinity creeps. Shallow lagoons pinch off from the main body, evaporate, and concentrate salts. Wells close to the coast turn brackish. Villages that once pumped sweet water from shallow aquifers find their taps tasting like tears. Tanker trucks show up twice a week instead of once. The price doubles on off days. Fishing collapses quietly first. Inlets that hatched fry turn to warm ponds with a salt line that shifts daily. Nets haul weed from channels that used to carry current. Small boats park on mud and wait for a blow that will never lift enough water to launch them again. In the markets, sturgeon is memory. Caspian seal haulouts, once tucked on offshore bars, sit too close to people and dogs. Disturbance rises, pups fail, and a species already in trouble sinks lower. Onshore industry meets its past. Exposed sediments near old loading points glitter with the film you only see if you've worked a terminal at night. The oil isn't fresh, it's persistent. When a dust devil scoops that top millimeter, it doesn't just move soil, it moves a chemical record into lungs. Soil tests upstream of the flats repeat a theme. Legacy loads wake up when wind returns. Companies try to get ahead of it. Shelter belts, belts of hardy shrubs and trees, go in along the new edge, the leaves meant to rough the wind and pin dust. Wetting programs spray problem zones before forecast gusts. Restricted zones grow on maps, closing new flats to foot traffic and off-roaders who carve paths that the wind turns into channels. It helps at the margins, it doesn't change the physics. A foreman at a yard outside Aktau runs a different ledger. He tracks lost time incidents, sure. He also tracks dust days, when crews work under masks and eyes sting by noon. Productivity dips. Insurance premiums ask new questions about respiratory PPE and air monitoring. An access road to a project catches a protest one Friday, residents angry about a week of grit in their kitchens and the way trucks kick the new shore into the air. Work stops for a day. Security adjusts routes. The dust keeps moving. Micro-stories stack. A teacher in Fort Shevchenko moves recess indoors for the 7th day this month, then wipes a fine film off the desks before math. A woman in a village near the Ural Delta tapes towels around window frames before a wind event the radio flagged at dawn, then fills buckets from a tanker she can't afford to miss. A port stevedore swaps goggles twice and still blinks grit from under the seal as he guides a lift under sky that looks clean until you stare long. Ecology bends under the same load. Reed beds race across new mud, trapping more dust near shore but pushing the fresh salt line into odd pockets that fish can't use. Bird counts shift as shallow feeding grounds vanish by summer. Conservation maps drawn a decade ago lose their anchors. Protected areas find themselves marooned from the habitats they were meant to guard. Policymakers reach for programs that sound like control. Plant more, spray more, close access, enforce, all necessary, none sufficient without water, because the flats aren't a problem to be managed, they're a symptom. The dust rises when the sea leaves. The salt creeps when inflow fails. The clinic fills when wind meets memory on exposed ground. In the end, the human ledger is plain. Lungs pay first, then budgets, then trust. A father watches his son's breathing settle at midnight after a nebulizer treatment and thinks about his own childhood afternoons by a shoreline that isn't there. He doesn't need a report to tell him what matters. He needs fewer dust days. He needs water closer than a truck. He needs wind that blows over waves, not over a map of old mistakes turned into air.